Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome, welcome. Here I am, still in Guanajuato, Mexico, and I'm glad to have you join me tonight. If you have the chance, and if you can, put in the chat box who you are and where you're calling from. Let me know that you're there so I can say hi. And while we're waiting for folks to join in, just let me know about that. I'll give you a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. So today we're going to Peru, back again for the third time since I started this series. And this will be the last one I'm going to do about Peru for a while. And today I'm going to be taking you on a few excursions that I went on in Peru. So, as many of you know, I'm a pretty independent traveler. It's my camera there. Okay, I'm a pretty independent traveler, and I don't like to use escorted tours. You probably heard me say this before, but there are times when I find that they can be quite valuable, and those I'm going to talk about some of those today and how I actually used escorted tours to make my traveling better or enhance it somewhat. So let's talk about the advantages of guided tours. One is that you don't have to worry about lodging or transportation. All your reservations are made for you, and that can be really nice sometimes. Another advantage is hopefully you will have a knowledgeable guide to escort you everywhere, and they can answer your questions, they can solve problems, they can make suggestions, they can translate for you, which is a big reason why I like to have a guide, is to translate when I don't know the language. Many of your meals are going to be included on an escorted tour, meaning you don't have to search for good places to eat. However, then you're kind of locked into those meals pretty much, so that can be a pro and a con. Also, many times in these tours, special demonstrations or performances or lectures or experiential kinds of activities might be included, and so that can be those can be kind of hard sometimes for you to get arrange just for one person or two people or just your family. So that is another thing that is an advantage. But there are some disadvantages, and of course the first one that I list is the cost. They tend to be pricey, at least to me. They usually, most of the time, if lodging and meals are included, they include meals and lodging of a level that I don't need. I would rather spend my money with experiences and meeting people as opposed to high-end hotels and places to eat. So that's one of the reasons that I tend to steer clear. You know, some of you know how cheap I am. You get hurried from place to place. You're locked into a schedule, and you have to be at, back on the bus or whatever at a certain time, and that can be kind of annoying. You can't really pick and choose where you're going to go. You kind of just have to go along with the flow. If you're not enjoying some aspect of the trip, you're stuck with the group. You can't, you might go off on your own a little bit, but it's a real challenge to do so. So that's another problem. On the other hand, if you're really having a good time with what you're doing, you can't linger because there's that schedule again. You have to go be on the bus or be at the next place at a certain time. You pretty much kind of have to stay with the group. So those are some of the advantages and some of the reasons why I don't use escorted tours very often. However, you will see that in the tours that I am talking about today, I'll tell you why I've chosen them and why. For each one of the tours, there's going to be 4 that I'm going to talk about. Some of the occasions we were going to remote places, or the transportation was going to be challenging for me to handle myself. And it was someplace that I really wanted to go. Maybe the trip had a very specific theme, something that I was especially interested in. A few weeks ago, you heard me talk about going and taking a class on dyeing yarn in Peru with natural materials. And so that was a specific thing that I was interested in myself. Sometimes a tour might be quite experiential, and it can be really valuable to have a guide along with you who can explain things, translate for you, and help out. So, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that as well. I also look for a small group tour. I don't want to be on one of those buses of 30 or 40 people and with all with 30 or 40 different agendas in their travels. So the smaller the group, the better. Also, it's nice if the trips are short. In other words, usually no more than 3 or 4 days. I would not want to be locked into a long-term all-inclusive excursion. I would get really tired of it. So usually it's a combination of several of these things that I look at when I'm considering hiring an agency to plan an excursion for me or going on a tour. So here's where we're going to go today. I'm going to show you a little bit about my trip to Manu National Park, which is a way that I wanted to go visit the jungle in Peru, and I did go with an agency there. I've also visited an organic cacao and coffee farms near Cusco, or near the Sacred Valley, kind of near the Sacred Valley. I did a trek to Choquequirao, which is a sister city to Machu Picchu, but there's hardly anybody there. And I went out to the islands of the Uros Islands and Isla Amantani, and those are on Lake Titicaca in southern Peru. So these were times when I did hire a guide or use some kind of an excursion. So let me show you on the map. Let's see if I get the map up here. Here's a map of Peru, gives you a kind of an orientation. And then all of the time that I spent in Peru, I was down here in southern Peru. So that's where we're going to go. And I will show you that these 4 places I went to Manu. Here's Cusco right here. And I went to Manu, to the cacao and coffee farms here, and to the Choquequirao trip here. They were all within a few hours drive of Cusco. And then when I was staying down near Puno, I took an excursion on a boat out to the islands in Lake Titicaca. So first I'm going to talk about going to the jungle, the Manu National Park. So here's some reasons why I chose to have an excursion for this one. You really need a boat when you're going to go to the jungle, and you need someone who knows how to read the river and take a boat down there safely. So that's transportation. I couldn't arrange that kind of transportation just on my own. Another thing is safety. If you're going to the jungle, you need to know how to get around, and you need to know about the animals, you need to know about the people, you need to know about what plants, you need to know everything. And it's very easy to get lost, so it's nice to have a guide. In this case, there was only 5 of us in this group, so it was quite small, plus our guide. And in this case, I could not have gone to the Manu National Park without a guide because it is required by law. They are protecting that part of the country and the people that live there, and so they require that you have a guide. So let's talk about where this is. So here's Peru on this side of South America. This is the Amazon basin. So all these rivers to anywhere to the east of the Andes Mountains that run right up along the coast here, all of the rest of the water flows over into the Atlantic Ocean, and much of it in Peru flows into the Amazon first. The river that we were going to visit in Manu was called the Madre Di Dios, and it starts right here. This purple river right here is where it starts. And one thing that I found completely amazing, I know the Amazon is a huge river, but even this far out from the headwaters, in the headwaters of the Amazon, the river is huge, and I'll show you some photos of that. I was amazed at how big this river is. So we started from Cusco. Let's see if I can, there we go. We started from, here's a road map. So we started down here at Cusco, and then in the morning, we had to be very early in the morning in a van, and the van took us first to Paucartambo, where we stopped and we were taken to, it's kind of an anthropology museum. The guide wanted to introduce us to the kinds of people that live up in this area of Peru. And she particularly wanted to introduce us to the people who are the indigenous tribe of the region called the Choquequiero. The locals in this area call the Choquequiero the naked people because they don't wear many clothes. But they are also quite primitive I don't know what you call primitive these days, but they are nomadic, and they're also territorial. So wherever they are living at the time, they protect that area very definitively. They will attack and have been known to kill people if you stray into their territory. So it's good to have a guide with you who knows what to look for, the signs to look for, to know that they're in the area, and to know how to get their clients out of the area and be safe. And the other reason is because Peru is protecting these indigenous people and keeping them safe from outsiders so that their culture is not completely obliterated by so many people coming in. So after we were in I can never pronounce it, Paucartambo, we went, then we crossed over the Andes over a very windy road, and that was when I was first introduced to how beautiful, how green, how lush, how amazing it is to go into a rainforest. The water was like everywhere. Everything was just so green and so full of life. It just blew me away. So we stayed in Pilcopato, which is the small town just outside of Manu National Park. We stayed there overnight, and then the next day we only had to go just a little ways further to get to the port of Atalaya, where we boarded a boat and that took us up the river. And here's the port. And you can see already, just from this view of the port, how huge this river is. I kept feeling like I was on a lake. And here's another view. It's not the greatest photograph, but you can get an idea how far that far shore is across. And there are some places where it is amazing how far it is across to the other shore, from one shore to the other. And I found that amazing, considering that waterfall was really the headwaters of the Amazon River. So our boat, we were dropped off at our lodging, and which was along the banks of the river. We had a nice view of the river. We had nice accommodations, and they fed us very well. All of our meals there kept us very comfortable while we were there. And then we boarded a boat and back on the boat again, and we spent the next 2 days with our guide taking us up and down the river, and we would get off of the boat and walk along the riverbank or up into the jungle to see various things that she had to show us. She took us to see visit some people that lived there, and they showed us some of their skills at hunting, and we also learned quite a bit about the medicinal plants of the jungle, many of which, of course, are used in some of our pharmaceuticals today. At one point, we walked across a swamp, and then were put onto a raft that went out into this beautiful lake. Look how green this is. It was just a tranquil, glassy lake that we were pulled on this raft so that we would be very quiet and we could see the wildlife. And that was another wonderful thing about having this great guide, is because she was so observant, and she could point. A lot of the wildlife we would not have seen except for her pointing it out to us. And so that was another reason to have a guide along with us. So my closest encounter with wildlife was this. I'll let you guess a second about what that is. And I was just sitting on the porch of the lodge, relaxing on the last afternoon, and this came crawling up my leg. It was a beautiful green grasshopper. Now, I know it maybe it's a little silly, but I just got so excited because he was so curious. He just kept crawling up my leg, and he crawled up my arm. He crawled all up my hand, And he didn't want to leave. I went over to a bush so I could maybe just lay him on the bush, and he wouldn't hardly get off of my hand. He was quite curious and friendly. So that was my experience with wildlife out in the jungle. On the second morning we were there, we were taken out to a place. It was called the Salt Lick, and it's where a lot of animals will congregate most mornings to get their quota of salt for the day. It's a clay cliff. It's got a lot of salt in it. But unfortunately, the day that we were there, it was rainy and misty. And our guide saw, when she saw what the weather was, she says, I don't think they'll come. We're going to go out and see. But and of course, they did not come. Normally, if they do show up, if the weather's nice, it's really a naturalist's and photographer's dream to see these animals so close. And get photographs and be able to experience some of the, especially the exotic birds that come there. But nature is not going to guarantee anything in these situations. We weren't in a zoo. So, but overall, it was a great experience. I was really glad I did it. The agency that handled it was very good. I loved the guide. And I have put the name of the agency in the notes for the video that you can check later to see if you're interested in knowing more about them. So the last morning, we boarded the boat one last time. We came back to the port of Atalaya, and we got on a bus and went back to Cusco. So that was it was a 4-day, basically a whole 4-day trip. So my next place to go to show you was one of the most interesting excursions that I have ever been on, was to the coffee and cacao farms. It's kind of north of Cusco. Now the problem is that it was on the other side of the Andes from the Sacred Valley. So I'll tell you why that was a problem for me in a little bit. But first I'll talk about the reasons I used an excursion. Number one, this had a very specific topic that I was interested in. It had a theme. And so that was what was right. I knew that the whole time we were going to be gone, we were going to be exploring this specific thing. It was very short. It was just an overnight excursion. Also, it was a very experiential trip in that we learned hands-on how coffee and cacao are processed. Guide with us so that he could translate, because the farmers did not speak English, and so it was nice to have the guide who could ask questions and clarify things that we didn't understand. Abel Gutierrez was our guide, and he almost exclusively takes people on this specific tour to these places. He also is very knowledgeable about Choquequiero, because that is where he's from. So if you're interested, if you think about going to Choquequiero near the Sacred Valley, or if you're interested in doing a trip like this and you're going to be in Peru, I encourage you to get hold of Abel. And I also have his contact information in the notes. He's very excited to start working again. I saw on his Facebook this last week that it looked like he may have taken a tour there recently. So it looks like maybe they're starting to get back in business down there, which would be very helpful to a lot of these people. This was also a very small group tour. There was only 4 of us in the trip, plus our guide. So that's really nice, a very intimate experience. Now let me tell you about the transportation. Here is the part of the road that takes you over the Andes Mountains. Look at this road starting way back over here and all this windy, squiggly stuff. Now, I tend to get a little bit of motion sickness, and I am very miserable after about an hour of this. But this was almost 2 hours, going an average of about 30 miles an hour over this road. Here you can see, even on Google Maps, I'll show you how squiggly that line is from Ollantaytambo, is where we started, all the way over the mountains. Those twists and turns were crazy, and I was in the back of the van, which is not the best place to be if you get car sick, but as it turned out, when we all got to the farm and piled out of that van, all of us were looking a little bit green, including Abel. He got out of the car and he says, yeah, I don't feel good either when I go over those mountains. But on the other hand, I would have hated taking this on public transportation, because practically to get there, at least 3 or 4 hours of going around those in a public bus. So here's the valley that we were coming to. Beautiful valley. This fertile valley was once filled with illegal coca plantations and all the associated crime that went with it. And about 35 years ago, which interestingly coincides with the beginning of the United States' war on drugs, you may remember that back in the 80s, the UN began a program of assisting with crop substitutions in a lot of places like this to help local farmers learn how to grow other crops like bananas, coffee, citrus, and cacao, and lots of other things, and substitute these in for the coca crops. And despite the fact that coca is certainly a much more lucrative crop, many of the farmers and their families have embraced these substitutes because, of course, it's safer for them. And now this whole valley is filled with new crops of all different kinds. When we got to the farm, we were assigned rooms in the guest house, and we were served a very hearty lunch. We were fed very well while we were there. And then Jose, who was the coffee farmer, showed us around his farm. Our hosts were Jose and his wife, Julia. They were the owners of this. One of the things that I first noticed when I arrived there was that there was a sign saying that they were a member of this Programa Orgánico. And that means that, and both of the farms we visited were a part of this program. That meant that they had been certified by the government as growing organic produce. 2 or 3 times a year, the farm has to be inspected, and if it fails one of the inspections, they are removed from the program for 10 years. So they have a lot of incentive to continue to use their organic methods to grow their crops, because they get a lot better prices for their products when it's organic. Now, an incredible thing about this is that everything is interplanted. This is shade. When you see shade-grown coffee on a coffee label, this is shade-grown coffee. You don't just see rows of coffee plants and nothing else. It's not a monocrop. It is a true food forest in the sense that when we think of permaculture, bananas and passion fruit, mandarins, limes, avocados, and even more things grew right alongside the coffee plants on this farm. These were all products that Jose and Julia had on their farm. And this method of growing also encourages the farmers to nurture the forest as a whole and keep everything much healthier. Now, Jose and Julia's farm has 2 kinds of coffee, a yellow coffee and a red coffee. The harvest begins in March and runs through August, so they have quite a very long harvest season. And there's some of the organic methods that they use include taking, if you look at this picture again, when a banana tree has finished bearing a stalk, has finished bearing, or they've cut the stalk off, that trunk of where that stalk was is not going to bear again, so it's cut down. And little smaller plants will come up beside that trunk and create another new banana trunks and another stalk of bananas. So, but the nice thing about this for coffee is that when they cut that trunk down, the water in the trunks goes back down into the ground, and it's full of potassium and other minerals that is really good for the coffee plants. So it really enriches the coffee itself. I found that pretty interesting. These plants start producing on their 2nd year, and they have about anywhere from 5 to 15 years of good production, and then they're cut back. But in the meantime, they actually plant baby plants down around the sides of these coffee, so that by the time they cut back an old plant, they already have a new plant that's in production. And here Abel, our guide, is holding a little tiny seedling of a coffee plant that he pulled up right up from underneath one of the coffee plants. So this ensures a constant harvest for the farmers. And all of these farmers save their own seeds for new plants. So there's absolutely no GMOs, no purchase seeds done in this kind of farming. So then we got to the experiential part. We got to pick some of the coffee berries, which we took back to the farmhouse to be processed. And most of the beans from this farm go to a local cooperative where they are processed up to what's called the green bean stage, which is the stage, and then they're shipped to the distributors. But so Julia and Jose only keep a few of the beans for their own use, and they process them by hand. They have a giant mill, which if you go, I've got a two-part blog post on my website, which I've listed in the notes to the video. I show some videos of actually working some of these machines. So they actually have a machine that they run the berries through, and it separates the bean from the outside fruit, pretty much. And then they take these beans and they let them ferment for about 12 hours in a big tank, and then wash them, and then they let them dry for between 3 and 5 days until the internal humidity of the beans are about 12%. And then we ran these beans through another small mill, which took the husks off of the beans, and then they were ready to be roasted. And Jose, the farmer, roasted them on an open fire for us, and then we stirred them to cool them down. And then we ran them through the final mill to grind them, and we got the freshest cups of coffee that you could ever experience in the world. It was quite good. It was quite fun to go through that whole process with them. So by that time, it was about time for dinner. Julia prepared us another wonderful meal. Her son and her nephew helped out in the kitchen and helped serve us. And we were not allowed to leave the table hungry. The next morning we got up, we had a breakfast of, it was like a banana and milk smoothie, fried yucca, fried plantains, cheese, bread, eggs, and of course we got to drink some more of that coffee that we had produced the day before. After that, Abel took us, and we walked about 20 minutes over to a neighboring farm where Raul is the farmer, and he grows cacao. Now this was the part I was looking for because I love chocolate. So he grows a special native cacao, which is better, they consider it probably more adapted to this climate than the hybrid varieties, but it is a smaller cacao, so it doesn't yield quite as much. But he has fewer, I think he has fewer problems with disease and other issues with the cacao. So here he's cutting one open for us. Here's what a cacao fruit looks like growing. It grows directly on the side of the trunk of these huge trees. And when you open them up, there is the beans are inside this fleshy fruit that looks kind of like ice cream. And that fruit actually is quite delicious. It's very refreshing. And then there's another kind of fruit between there and the peel, and that is that yellow part there is can be eaten once it is cooked, and sometimes people use it to substitute for it's a vegetarian substitute for steak. But unfortunately, I didn't think to try that while I was down there. I wish I would have, because I don't know what it tastes like. Peru grows about less than 2% of the cacao in the whole world, but at the time that I was there, it was second in the world in the production of organic cacao, and Ecuador at that time was first. So that's where most of our organic chocolate, anything that has says organic cacao in the chocolate bars that we eat, they come probably from Peru or Ecuador. And then, of course, more experiential stuff, we got to make our own chocolate. The process that they take the beans through is pretty much similar to that of coffee. The seeds are fermented for 3 or 4 days, and then the beans are dried down to about an 8% humidity level. Of course, we didn't have time. We weren't going to be long enough for all the fermentation process, so Raul had some that he had already fermented, and then he roasted them again in an open fire, and as they cooled, then it was our job to hull these beans, there was a hole in the outside of them. We did that by hand. Normally, of course, it's done by machine. And then it went through, and here we are. This is the tour group hulling the beans, and then it was run through another mill, and because of the high oil content in the beans, it comes out almost like the consistency of peanut butter. We got a chance to taste this, and they brought us some bread and some mandarins and some bananas to spread it on. But I want to tell you, my favorite thing to eat this on, and you would never guess, I would have never guessed it myself, was avocado. 100% cacao paste is not sweet. So it's like if you buy unsweetened chocolate to bake with in the grocery store, that's what it tastes like. So, but it has a lot of flavor, and that on avocado for some reason just really went together well. I really enjoyed it. And then Raul also made us some hot chocolate, which is made with water, not milk. And that is the way that the people have made hot chocolate or a drink from cacao in this area for well before the Incas came. And I believe the Aztecs also drank chocolate in this way as well. So after that, Raul took us to town. We walked to town and to his mother's house. His mother's name is Margarita, and here she is. And she processes I think about half of their crop themselves into their own brand of chocolate or cacao bars. So these bars are 100% cacao, and she processes it all there herself. What was really fun was that when I walked in the door with the group, she saw me laughing, and she came over and hugged me, and the whole time I was there she was laughing and smiling, and she hugged me several times, and she acted like she was so excited, like she had been like, oh, you surprised me that you came. And I don't think explanation I could have for it was that maybe because I was close to her age, and she maybe is used to having younger tourists come in these groups. But she was really excited to see me, and I was really excited to be able to buy some of her cacao because the price was amazing. I purchased several 400-gram bars, and that is 400 grams is almost a pound. And these bars were they came out to about $3.20 each. So that was a really good deal, and my daughter, who is a chef, was really excited to get her hands on some of that really great organic cacao. So then we returned back to Jose and Julia's house for a huge meal before we left. Now here's a problem, is that generally they dish the food up for you. You can't choose how much you eat. I kept trying to tell her that I just wanted a little bit because I knew that we were getting ready to get in that car and go back over that same road that we had come on. But so I found a compromise, and I managed to eat almost everything on my plate. It was really good, but I was so afraid to have a full stomach going over that road. I did okay, but I was pretty tired and worn out girl by the time I got back to the Sacred Valley. Here's a picture, a beautiful picture of Julia and Jose, and this is their son, and this was their nephew that he lives nearby, but he's down there all the time working, and they really made our stay wonderful. So again, I have information in the video notes. If you ever are in the Sacred Valley area and you want to do a tour like this, please contact Abel. He was wonderful, and he'll set you right up. It was not a very expensive tour, as I recall, either. I think I very much got my money's worth on this trip. So the next trip that I'm going to talk about is the trek to Choquequirao. Choquequirao is right here. It's about a 4-hour drive from Cusco, and so that's another reason that I wanted to, it's a small reason why I wanted to use a tour agency, because it would have taken all day by public transport just to get to the trailhead. Also, this trek starts at 10,000 feet, and you're doing the same thing as if you went down to the Grand Canyon and back out again, and then you went back down to the Grand Canyon and came back out again. That's about the equivalent of how hard this trek is, except that it's about 3,000 feet higher in elevation. So I was a little concerned about whether or not I'd be able to make it. I had spent the last 3 months in Peru training, and I had been training a little bit in high altitude, but I was still a little bit nervous about it. But the nice thing is that when you do a trek like this, that the agency has horses that carry all of your stuff. So the only thing you have to carry is like your water, your camera, sunscreen, and that's about it, and your trekking poles. And so that was really nice. The other thing that happened was, it was kind of a benefit, was that, let me mention one other thing. This was also a short tour. It was only 4 days, and it was very specific. We were going out to these ruins at Choquequirao that you can only get to by walking or on horseback. And it was also a small group. There were only 4 of us in the group, plus the guide, the horse crew, and the cook. And as I said, this is a remote and challenging location. That's another reason. It's a nice reason to have a guide. You can do this trek on your own without a guide. But you have to carry, it's a 2-day trip in at least, and there's also, you can continue on from Choquequirao, and I'll actually hike all the way to Machu Picchu, but I believe for that you need a permit. So you can do this trek on your own, but of course you're going to have to carry all of your food and your gear. We had such camping luxury. Santiago was our cook. He fixed all of our meals for us, and lunch and dinner included soup, a 3-dish entree, and dessert on this little camp stove, sitting on his stool. This is how he prepared all of his meals, and he did it with a wonderful smile. He was a great cook to have. And when we arrived at our camps in the evening, our tents were all set up for us with comfortable thermal rest. All we had to do was just basically tumble into bed. My daughter Rebecca joined me on this excursion. She came, this was in 2014, and she joined me for a month in Peru. And this was kind of the culmination of our trip to do this. And she was watching this live broadcast this morning, and she put it in the text. She says, that was the favorite trip of my entire life. So it was really great to hear that from her. I know that she's always thought of it as being a wonderful trip. So Choquequirao is considered to be a sister site to Machu Picchu, but not very many people know about it, possibly because it's so hard to get to. However, only about 30% of the ruins so far have been uncovered from the jungle, and some researchers really believe that the site may be even larger than Machu Picchu once they have it uncovered. So that is exciting to know. The government has been talking for probably at least 10 or 20 years about possibly putting in a cable car to make it easier for people to go to visit Machu Picchu, to visit Choquequirao, and maybe take some of the tourism away from Machu Picchu, because Machu Picchu is really getting over-trafficked now with tourists. So here was our route. Our trailhead was right here. And we descended 1,500 meters, which are like 4,900 feet, in not quite 6, or a little over 6 miles down to the river, where we camped overnight. And then the next day we ascended 5,500 feet in 13 kilometers. The last few kilometers were kind of flat, so that was nice. That was our trip. That was 1 day to here, another day there. We spent the night, and then we came back the next day and then out. So it was 4 full days of walking. We camped here near the Paramac River, and in the morning we were awakened by Santiago, and with a beautiful Buenos Dias at the tent door, and he brought us munya tea, which is kind of a mint tea, and wash ourselves. It was just like having room service, and we had to get going very early. That was 4:30 in the morning the first morning, because of the heat. We wanted to beat that heat and get up into the higher elevations where it was a little bit cooler as soon as possible. And we were going to be walking almost all the entire 8 miles uphill. Now, one of the things that I did, this was our guide. His name was Sam, and he was an incredibly gifted young man, and he couldn't have made our trip more wonderful. And he took care of all of the arrangements. He dealt with any problems that the rest of the crew was having, and any problems the cook was having, and he did it all with a smile on his face. And he was a really wonderful man. I'm going to talk a little bit about him later on. So the nice thing about the second day that was exciting was that we just learned that the bridge that went across the Paramac River had been washed out the year or so before, and so now we were going to have to cross it in a cable car. And I had never done anything like this, and I was a little bit nervous, and I was going like, okay, if I have to shut my eyes, I'll shut my eyes. I had no idea what it would be like. As it turned out, I loved it. It was so much fun to go across the cable car with our gear, and I understand, however, now that bridge has been rebuilt, so visitors don't get this like little thrill as a part of their trip now. And at the end of this broadcast, I have a video showing us riding that cable car. So then, as I said, we went up. This day we went up. I had arranged with the other woman that was on the trip, who was also not young. We had arranged to pay for it together. We split the cost of having an extra horse on the trip in case either one of us had a problem, because both of us were a little bit nervous about making this trip. I never did use the horse in an emergency, but I decided partway up this hill, I'm going to get on the horse. We had it, and it's a pack horse. It's not really a riding horse. It does not respond to being ridden like with rein. So I was the pack on the horse, and for about an hour I rode the horse just so that my knees didn't get too overextended during this trip, and I would be able to make it out. So there's Sam leading me up the hill on the horse. During this day, we went from a very arid rain up into a cloud forest where there was water everywhere. It was green. It was very humid. It was quite interesting how we changed climate so quickly. About halfway up the mountain, we came to this town of Marampanta. This is Sam's home village. And little boy, he was raised here, and when he was young, he had seen guides bring people up through this village to go to Choquequirao and sometimes on to Machu Picchu. And when he was little, he said, I want to be a tour guide too. And so he did all the things he needed to do. He left the village to go to school outside the village to get a better education. He learned English, and then he became eligible to go to tourism school, where he got his certification to be a guide. So he's really worked hard to do the thing that he loves. And if you'll notice this little trail going into Marampanta, that's the trail into town. There's no roads up here. All these people, when they go in and out, they have to walk up and down this trail. There was a nice, a little tiny store. All these little villages have little stores, little tiny stores, and we were able to get some apples, some yogurt, some milk chocolate, and we rested for a while. And while we were resting, Sam went and visited his aunt and his cousins for a little bit because he hadn't been up there for a while. Then we had a few more kilometers to go that were pretty flat, and then we came to the entrance of Choquequirao Park, and we had to sign in the logbook, and there were only 15 other day to visit this park. Now think about the difference between that and the thousands of people who visit Machu Picchu every day. It was really a very beautiful, quiet place to visit. So we had lunch in our camp, and then we walked up a little ways further just to go up to where the ruins were, and we up on a hillside overlooking the ruins. Sam shared a history of the site and told us some things to look for us to make it a richer experience for us. We also we had to go over a hill, and we visited what have become these, and these are agricultural terraces, and if you can tell, there's kind of steps up big steps up where the agriculture, the crops were raised, but all of these, like the terraces that you see all over Peru and Mexico on the mountains. But along the walls of the terraces, the Incas had put in these depictions of llamas, and so this is called the Llama Terraces, and they were only discovered in 2004, and they were pretty much intact. There's been very little restoration done. They're in really wonderful shape. And then at the top of the terraces, there is a depiction of a snake. A snake is one of the power animals of the Incas, and still to this day, the snake, the puma, which we call a mountain lion, and the condor are all power animals to these people. So here's a few more views of the ruins. We were very lucky because we were there at the end of the day, so we got to just walk around. We were the only people there, the 5 of us, so it turned out to be a beautiful, relaxing time to visit here, and we got to watch the sunset there, which then of course we got to walk back to camp in the dark, but to be able to do that was an incredible experience. Then the next morning we woke up, and here is the view from our tents. I felt like I was like up in heaven because of all these clouds that were below us. It was just absolutely beautiful. It was a cool day. It had rained during the night, but it didn't rain on us while we were walking, so we were very thankful about that. So it was a fairly easy going downhill back to the river. We were in the cloud forest, and there was, of course, lots of water, lots of creeks everywhere. We went back through the village shrouded in fog and looked kind of magical. And of course, I'm a very slow hiker, and even when going downhill, sometimes I'm almost as slow going downhill if the trail happened to be kind of muddy that day, so it was a little bit slippery. So I was being really careful, but Sam was really patient. He stayed back with me because I was the last one all the way down, conversing with me, laughing, telling stories. So it all worked out. Partway down, we came to a campsite, and we just had lunch there, but this campsite was run by Sam's cousin, so we got to visit with him a little bit, and again, we bought things from his little store. It was a really refreshing place to have our lunch. And then we went down a little ways further, and we could see the trail on the other side of the river. This was the trail we had come down. But when we looked at it from our standpoint of being our 3rd day in, and realized that we were going to have to go up that trail before we were going to cross the river and go back up that trail before we got to our campsite, I just had to not think about that. I just had to put one foot in front of the other. But the nice thing is that we got to ride that cable car again back across the river. So that day, once we crossed the river, we only had to walk about an hour up this trail, and then we got to our campsite. Got one more night's rest, and the next morning it was just basically walking out, but we had a shorter bit of way to go to get out. But I will tell you that those last 15 to 20 switchbacks on the other side of that that were near the top of getting to the trailhead just about did me in. I was getting really discouraged, but I made it. It was very empowering. It's probably one of the most empowering things I've ever done, to know that I could do that kind of a hike and come out of it alive. And here's my daughter and I standing by the banks of the Paramac River. I will say that this trip for me, those of you that know me know how cheap I am. It was an expensive trip, and there was times when Becca and I both thought, "Oh, we really want to spend our money for this?" La la la. It cost about $300 US for each of us at that time. I think now it's probably more than that. But for me, that was quite a bit to spend for an escorted tour. But I will tell you that, considering how well we were taken care of and what a great experience it was, I'm really glad that I did it, and I would probably do it again if I decided I wanted to do that trek, especially if I could go with Sam. He was a great guy. As I said, he worked really hard to become a very good guide. At that time, he was working for another agency, but since then he has his own agency. He's gotten married, he has a son, life goes on, but this COVID has been a real challenge for him and for any of these people that work in tourism. He's looking forward to getting back to work. So if you're going to Peru and you're thinking about doing a trek he does other treks as well, not just this one. So I would definitely contact him and ask him what kinds of tours he has, and use his agency for booking. And again, his contact information is in the notes. So I have one more place to take you, down at Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world. It's quite large. It borders, it's on the south end of Peru and Bolivia. Part of the lake actually is in Bolivia. So the reason that this is the trek that I did, I kind of did it my way. I altered it a little bit, and I'll explain that. But the reason that I decided to do this as an excursion was, number one, it's another time when you needed a boat to get there. So transportation would have been an issue. It was short for me. Normally this trip lasts 2 days. I extended it so that I had 3 days on this trip. Part of the trip I'm going to get into this, part of the trip is so unusual that it's very useful to have a guide to explain things to you. And also the homestay for you on Llama Amantani. But what I did to make this my own trip was that the normal package tour to the islands is booked through an agency. And normally what they do is they put you on a boat down at the port one day, they take you out to the islands, and you sleep overnight, and then you come back. And for me, I wanted to spend, when you do that, you get to your homestay about 1 o'clock. You barely have any time. You're tired. You don't have much time to spend on the island exploring, and then you have to leave the next morning at 7:30 to go back to Puno. And so you barely get any chance to engage with the people or see what the island is like at all. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to stay 2 nights in Amantani. So I asked my host at my guest house if it was possible, if I could do that, and he said, here's what you do. Don't go to an agency. Go down to the pier in Puno and pay the captain directly for the trip. And then when I reach the island, I pay my host family directly instead of having them all paid by the agency. And he said one thing is the families actually receive more of the proceeds that way, and they get paid sooner because they don't have to wait for the agency to send them the money. And so that's what I did. And the nice thing about this is that because the guides are attached to the boats, not the agency, because I was a passenger on the boat, I still had the advantage of having a guide with me to take me. First, we went to the Uros Islands. Let me see if I can get here. The Uros Islands are actually literally floating islands. The people who live there are fairly private, so you can't just go to any of the islands, but they have one island set up that is a demonstration island so that tourists can come and see how these islands have been made and how people live on them. The people there are fishermen, and they also trap water birds for a living. So here's the reason. These islands are actually made out of reeds. And if you look around the edges of Lake Titicaca, there are huge patches of these reeds everywhere. And so they take them and they take the bottom part of the reed, and they make these rafts out of that. They tie these boggy parts of the reed together and make a raft that on top of those rafts, then they pile more reeds about 3 feet thick. So in total, it's about 6 feet from where it's floating in the river or floating in the lake, all the way up to the surface. And here's what an island looks like from a distance. And then once they do that, they can have their shelter on top of it. Also, these reeds are used a lot for thatching, even on the mainland as well. So you can imagine that these people have to be pretty careful of fire when they're cooking their meals. So you're able to go and actually walk on these islands. And the interesting thing is that they take these rafts and they actually stake them to the bottom of the lake with cords and stakes. I don't know exactly who it is that goes down to the bottom of the lake and pounds in these stakes, but that's how they stay in one place. The other thing that they do is they make these really interesting reed boats. This is what historically they used to get around in the lake. Mostly now they use motor boats. I have a picture of some later, but they do still make the boats, and they will take you on a little trip around the island so you can see what it's like to walk in them. It was a very tranquil experience, quite comfortable. But like I said, they mostly use motorboats now, and you can see on the islands these solar panels. So they have electricity, and they have at the time they also had satellite dishes. I'm guessing probably by now they have full internet access at many of these islands. The Uros Islands, we went on to Llama Amantani, where we were assigned a family home to stay in. I went with a woman named Marisol, and she and her husband have this nice little guest house. Let's see, this guest house. There were two other couples from the boat that also stayed with us the first night. Marisol prepared us a really nice meal of quinoa soup, fried cheese, boiled potatoes. Is a vegetable that's kind of like if you put a carrot and a potato together. That's what oca tastes like to me, and it's a root vegetable as well. So after the lunch, the other two couples, they went on a walk, but because I love to fool with fiber and knitting and spinning, I asked if Marisol and her daughter would share some of their knitting with me. So I ended up spending the afternoon knitting with them and spinning, and Melissa, her daughter, liked to crochet more than knit. So she was crocheting, and I actually purchased from her these little the Quechua, and the women that live here are the Amira people. The people of this part of Peru are not the Quechua, which is in most of Peru. These are the Amira people, and the Amira people are also found in Bolivia. And but anyway, just like the Quechua women, they like to decorate their braids, and because I wear braids, it was always fun to have these decorations in my hair as well. These were some flowers that Melissa had created on crochet. So we had another nice meal, and then in these high Andean villages, it gets cold very quickly when the sun goes down, and went to bed quite early. I had a comfortable place. At night there's no electricity, but I had a candle and of course my flashlight. And it rained and had a wonderful thunderstorm during the night. I felt like all of the lightning was right above me. It was really wonderful. So it was a great experience. In the morning we woke to a breakfast of fried bread, and the other two couples went back on the boat. But that day was my 60th birthday. And the way that I ended up spending my time was walking around the village and walking up to the top of the hill, which is called Pachamama. And I spent the day the morning walking up there. I spent some time at the top of the hill, looking down at the agricultural terraces. The people were working, harvesting potatoes, so I met several families as I was walking up. And then quite a few of these arches over the walkway as well. This is a very sacred site at the top. Here's the view from the top. And they do a lot of seasonal rituals here, and people come from other islands to participate in some of these, mostly rituals that have to do with planting crops and the harvest. So this was a great way to celebrate my 60th birthday. I walked back downhill, and on the way I met a family. This was the son, and the father, and was asking me, like, he was so interested in what I was doing there, and asked me a lot of questions, and we talked for a while. They were very friendly, and so I had my opportunity to meet several people as I walked up and when I walked down the hill. When I got back to the house, Melissa had already prepared lunch. Her mother was out, had been working in the field, so Melissa was the one that prepared lunch. And then later in the afternoon, I had the opportunity to go with Melissa. She was a really small child. She walked down to the porch, which was quite a steep walk down, and got about 12 liters of sodas and water and put them on her back. And I walked back with her back up the hill. I could barely make it up the hill. She's walking with all of this water on her back because they have a small store that they put in that's right on the plaza by their house. And Melissa is the one that runs the store. So we got back to the store. She starts dusting all the shelves and taking care of all of the making sure all the merchandise is right, and then she opens the store, and all the time that the store is open, she's there to wait on people, and they come in and get little things from the store. And one of the things I was going to show you, let's see. Oh yeah, so but when she's waiting for the customers, there she was doing her math homework at the counter while she was waiting. She was such a responsible young lady. It was quite a delight. I started thinking about her the last few days while I was preparing this program, and I'm going like, you know, she's maybe a mother by now because it's been, and she was 13 at the time. So it's very likely that she is, she's certainly a young woman by now. I would love to see how much she has matured. So it was a great evening. I got to spend some time sitting on the plaza talking to some people there at the plaza, and so I was really glad that I had extended this to an extra night so that I had all this luxurious time to spend there visiting and learning more about their culture. So I had one more night with Marisol and her family, and then in the next morning I had a great breakfast, and Marisol took me down to the port, and I was taken back to Puno on the boat. So that was my trip to Amantani and the Uros Islands. So as you can see, that's 4 times that I have booked an agency, and I'm an independent traveler, and I generally don't do this kind of thing, but as you can see, I have certain reasons when I am willing to spend the money and put up with some of the issues, you know, that you have when you have a guided excursion. So, but you can see that I don't utilize like a long-term all-inclusive type of tour with 30 people on a bus, because that really can keep you from having these wonderful experiences with people locally. And so that's probably the main reason that I don't, and probably the other main reason, because I'm so darn cheap, is that I don't want to pay for them. You can learn more about independent travel and about my reasons for not using excursions very much on my blog, and I put the links in the notes to this video. And also I want to encourage you to never be afraid to think outside the box, even when you are going on an excursion, like I did at Lake Titicaca. Start asking some questions. Can I do it this way? Can I do this? Can I do it that way? Start thinking in ways to make your experiences to be even better. So I'm really glad that you joined me tonight. Excuse me. I will probably be back in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure what the topic is. I would love to hear from you and know what you would like to hear from me. As far as topics go, I've gotten the idea that people like to hear stories about the travels more than about how I travel. So if you have any specific thing you would like to know more about, please let me know, and I will try to prepare a broadcast about it. So I'm going to say goodbye for now, and what you're going to see next is a video of my daughter and I going across on that wonderful cable car. Maybe I'm ready for a zip line.